He belittled his quiet wife at the founders' ball. Years later, she returned as the woman who owned the deal. When Kellen Maseko lifted his champagne glass and called his own wife the girl from the floodplain I should have outgrown, the people around his table laughed as if cruelty were intelligence. It happened at the Founders' Ball, a glittering private event above the city, where investors, ministers, startup celebrities, and old money families gathered beneath chandeliers so bright they made everyone look more powerful than they really were. A live jazz band played near the glass terrace. The skyline glittered behind them. Cameras flashed at the entrance. Waiters moved through the room carrying silver trays and smiles that belonged to no one. And in the middle of all that luxury, Kellen smiled. On his phone was a photo of his wife, Nia. She was standing in a muddy farming district hours away from the city, wearing a simple cream-wrapped dress and rubber boots, laughing beside a group of women loading crates of mangoes into a cooling truck. There was no stylist, no diamonds, no luxury brand on her shoulder, just sunlight, sweat, dust, and dignity. One man leaned closer and chuckled. "That's really your wife?" Another shook his head. "With all the money you move, I expected someone more refined." Kellen should have defended her. Once, years ago, he would have. Instead, he took a slow sip of his drink and said, "Nia is decent, loyal, but some people are made for quiet places. You can't bring floodplain energy into rooms built for influence." The table erupted. Someone slapped his shoulder. Someone called him savage. Someone laughed so hard he bent over the table. And Kellen, drunk on approval, smiled as if he had said something brilliant instead of heartless. What he did not know was that the woman they were mocking would one day return in copper gold silk, walk into a room far more powerful than this one, and take control of the company he had nearly destroyed trying to impress people who never respected him. But that night was still ahead. At 41, Kellen Maseko had become one of the most celebrated logistics entrepreneurs in Southern Africa. His company, Meridian Gate, controlled storage routes, trucking contracts, bonded warehouses, and high-value freight corridors that stretched from port cities to inland markets. Business magazines called him a visionary. TV anchors called him disruptive. Investors called him relentless. Kellen loved all of it. He loved the suits tailored in Milan. He loved the photo shoots. He loved hearing younger founders say his name with admiration. He loved the illusion that success had turned him into a man who had never been afraid. But success does strange things to insecure people. It doesn't always heal their wounds. Sometimes, it decorates them. Years earlier, before the awards and glossy profiles and government contracts, Kellen had married Nia Maseko when his life was still held together by borrowed hope and unpaid invoices. Back then, he admired her quiet mind. He admired the way she never fought for attention. He admired how she could enter a room and somehow reduce the noise inside it. He admired that she cared more about usefulness than applause. Nia came from a rural district shaped by floods, poor roads, broken cold storage, and markets that failed farmers before the harvest was even finished. She understood waste before she understood wealth. She had seen fruit rot because trucks came late. She had watched mothers lose income because produce spoiled before it reached the city. She had lived inside the gap between hard work and fair access. So while Kellen chased expansion and investor rounds, Nia worked with women growers, village cooperatives, and small transport groups trying to build better farm-to-market systems. She helped women understand pricing, storage, timing, and negotiation. She sat under shade trees with notebooks on her knees. She spent mornings at collection points, afternoons in training sheds, and evenings making calls no one glamorous ever wanted to make. The work mattered. It just didn't look impressive to people who judged value by lighting. At first, Kellen's disrespect came disguised as concern. "You need a new image," he would say. "You represent me, too." Serious men have wives who understand presentation. "You do good work, Nia, but you still look like you're headed to a village council meeting." Nia listened quietly. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she said nothing. Because when love is still alive, people often mistake disrespect for stress. She kept believing the man she married was still somewhere inside the man's success was teaching him to become. But the higher Kellen climbed, the less interested he seemed in being found. He stopped asking about her fieldwork. He stopped visiting project sites with her. He stopped pretending to be curious. At dinner, his phone sat closer to him than she did. At home, his body arrived, but his attention did not. One night, Nia cooked the fish stew he loved when they were younger and waited for him until nearly 10. When he finally arrived, he loosened his tie, glanced at the table, and said he had already eaten. "You could have called," she said gently. Kellen dropped his keys on the counter and exhaled as though she were exhausting. "Nia, must everything become emotional?" She did not ask for flowers. She did not ask for romance. She did not ask him to remember an anniversary. She had asked to be considered. But by then, even ordinary kindness felt to him like a burden. Across the city, another woman was stepping into his life with exactly the kind of shine he had started confusing with substance. Her name was Soraya Dubé. Tall, elegant, sharp-eyed. The kind of woman who spoke as though every room had already made space for her. Soraya was a corporate reputation strategist who worked with luxury founders, private equity men, and political elites who wanted to look visionary while remaining entirely self-interested. She met Kellen at a trade summit after moderating a panel on African expansion capital. He noticed her before she reached him. Most men did. She wore a structured black gown and spoke with the calm confidence of someone who understood both image and weakness. When she shook his hand, she held it for half a second longer than necessary. "I've heard so much about you," she said. For a man like Kellen, that sentence was not information. It was perfume. They spoke for 20 minutes that night. He talked about scale. She praised his ambition. He complained about how lonely success could be. She tilted her head as if she understood completely. By the end of the week, he was thinking about her. By the end of the month, he was lying. The affair did not begin with thunder. No dramatic confession, no sudden disaster. Just messages, then lunches, then strategy meetings dressed up as necessity, then hotel lounges, then nights he said investors needed him late. Soraya never asked him to leave his wife. She was too clever for that. Instead, she fed the comparison. "A man building a continental brand needs alignment," she would say. "Perception matters. The woman beside you speaks before you do. Legacy isn't just business, it's presentation." She never said Nia's name. She didn't have to. Kellen did the rest in his own mind. At home, Nia noticed the distance before she understood its shape. The sharpened impatience, the colder eyes, the way he dismissed anything connected to farmers, women's storage networks, cooperatives, or transport reform, as if lives only mattered when luxury magazines approved of them. One afternoon, she found him in his study looking over models for Port Aurora, a massive private logistics hub he believed would make Meridian Gate untouchable. It was his vanity project, his masterpiece, his monument. "Will you be free next Saturday?" she asked from the doorway. He barely looked up. For what? The women in Kasinga are launching the new solar cooling center. They asked if he would come. He kept turning pages. I have better uses for my Saturday. Something in her face shifted, but only slightly. It would mean a lot. To whom? He asked. To them or to you? Nia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said the saddest sentence a marriage can hear. I'm beginning to understand the difference. In the months that followed, her world expanded while her marriage kept shrinking. The cooling center worked. Loss rates dropped. Women who used to throw away spoiled produce now sold it at fair margins. A regional supermarket chain placed trial orders. A food distributor in the capital asked if her network could handle weekly supply. Then, a hotel group asked about dried fruit packaging and premium jam contracts. Quiet progress multiplied. Nia did not announce these wins online. She did not package them for envy. She simply worked. That was the thing about her. She did not build for applause. She built for durability. Kellen, meanwhile, sank deeper into image. Soraya introduced him to rarer circles, more expensive rooms, richer appetites, and more dangerous forms of validation. Suddenly, ordinary success was not enough. He needed private clubs, premium tables, better headlines, more public admiration. Port Aurora grew bigger, more expensive, more theatrical. New consultants, imported systems, decorative architecture no logistics company truly needed. Massive bridge financing, silent debt. Everyone around him called it visionary. No one around him called it reckless. Because men who generate money rarely hear honest warnings for long. Then came the night everything finally broke. At a private fundraising dinner, one guest asked Kellen where his wife was. Before he could answer, Soraya smiled into her glass and said lightly, "Maybe rural air suits her better than crystal chandeliers." There was soft laughter. Kellen could have stopped it. Instead, he said, "Trust me, Nia would be uncomfortable here. She still thinks value wears boots and smells like mango crates." This time, the laughter spread wider. Cruelty always sounds sharper when it is polished. Someone clipped the quote. Someone repeated it. By morning, it was moving through private circles, not as scandal exactly, but as entertainment. Kellen dismissed it. What he did not know was that humiliation sometimes becomes the final permission a wounded heart needs to stop waiting. A week later, over breakfast, Nia asked him one question. "Are you leaving this marriage?" Kellen looked up, startled not by the question, but by how calm she sounded. He could have lied. He had done it many times already. Instead, he set down his coffee and said, "I think we both know this has been over for a while." There are moments when pain arrives so precisely it feels surgical. Nia did not cry. She did not shout. She did not plead. She looked at the man she had loved through poverty, ambition, debt, fear, and transformation. And for the first time, she understood that the grief in front of her was not losing him. The grief was realizing he had been leaving in pieces for years. "Is there someone else?" she asked. His silence answered first. Then he said, "Yes." She nodded once, not dramatically, not theatrically, just once. That was the day the marriage ended. Not in court, not on paper, in truth. The divorce moved quickly. Kellen expected resistance, but Nia gave him none. She asked for very little. She kept the riverside property outside the city, retained her small shares in an obscure warehouse software company she had quietly invested in years earlier, and secured access to several underused cold storage leases Meridian Gate had once dismissed as irrelevant to its luxury freight strategy. Kellen signed faster than he read. Why wouldn't he? He believed the real wealth was his. That assumption would cost him everything that mattered. After the divorce, the city did what cities always do. It sided with glamour. People praised Soraya's sophistication. They praised Kellen's boldness. They called Naya old-fashioned, provincial, unprepared for her husband's success. Naya heard the noise. Then she returned to work. Pain, when disciplined, becomes fuel. She studied finance harder than ever before. She learned commodity pricing, aggregation systems, storage utilization, export compliance, route optimization, and contract law. She hired young engineers who understood digital tracking. She brought in 2 women from agricultural banking. She used the forgotten software stake to build a platform that matched small growers, local carriers, cooling units, and urban buyers in real time. What had once looked like scattered rural effort slowly became something far bigger. Not a charity, a system, a cold chain network, a data platform, a women-led supply engine, a future. She called it Rivermantle, because it was built from the places people stepped over when they were rushing toward power. Rivermantle started with fruit, then dairy, then flowers, then pharmaceuticals requiring regulated temperature routes, then regional cross-border shipping for medical supplies. Within 2 years, the network had become one of the most efficient emerging cold logistics systems in the region. Farmers were wasting less. Women were earning more. Buyers were noticing. Impact investors began calling. Trade journals wrote features. Development finance institutions requested meetings. Then came the woman who changed everything. Her name was Amara Okonkwo, a Nigerian infrastructure investor known for seeing value before markets were ready to admit it. She visited Nia's main operations yard without convoy, without performance, and without wasting words. She wore flat shoes, carried her own tablet, and asked brutal questions. After touring the facility and reviewing the numbers, Amara looked at Nia and said, "What would you build if you stopped thinking like someone who once needed permission to enter the room?" Nia answered honestly, "National food resilience, rural cold ports, women-owned freight corridors, and eventually, sovereign distribution." Amara did not blink. "Good," she said. "Now we can begin." At that exact moment, Kellen's empire had started cracking beneath its own reflection. Port Aurora was bleeding money. Currency shifts raised import costs. Debt terms tightened. Bondholders grew impatient. Major clients delayed commitments. Freight margins dipped. 2 lenders began whispering about governance risk. Internally, Meridian Gate looked stable. In reality, it was choking on vanity. Kellen kept performing confidence because men who worship appearances often mistake denial for leadership. Soraya encouraged the performance. "You need one giant win," she told him. "One headline. One public endorsement. Then everyone calms down." She pushed him toward riskier refinancing, more visibility, more image management, more desperation disguised as strategy. Kellen listened because by then he trusted admiration more than instinct. Months later, the city prepared for the Continental Infrastructure Forum, the most exclusive gathering of capital, trade ministers, private founders, and institutional lenders in the region. Kellen believed the forum would save him. A debt restructuring coalition was rumored to be announcing a private rescue package there. Soraya insisted they attend. She ordered a silver gown. He ordered a new tuxedo. They walked toward the event expecting validation. Neither realized the night belonged to someone else. Across the city, Nia was preparing too. But unlike them, she was not dressing to be admired. She was dressing to arrive with intent. Her team had commissioned a gown unlike anything the old elite expected from her. It was not imported. It was not borrowed from a European house desperate to be photographed on African wealth. It was made by designers from 3 women-led textile studios in her own network. Copper gold silk, structured shoulders, hand-finished embroidery like river lines under light. A long, flowing back panel that moved like authority. When Nia first saw it, she touched the fabric and said nothing. An older tailor smiled. "This is not for beauty," she said softly. "It is for memory." That night, black vehicles lined the entrance of the forum venue. Inside, chandeliers scattered amber light over polished stone floors. Billionaires stood beside ministers. Bankers stood beside policy architects. Everyone wore confidence like armor. Kellen and Soraya arrived to cameras. She looked immaculate. He looked expensive. And for a little while, that still worked. People greeted him warmly. A banker smiled too carefully. An investor dodged specifics. One board member avoided eye contact. Soraya kept moving, collecting compliments as if they were currency. Then the main doors opened again. At first, only a few people turned. Then more. Then, conversations slowed in ripples. Nia stepped inside. She did not rush. She did not pose. She did not search the room for approval. And yet the room bent toward her attention the way people always bend toward genuine gravity when they mistake it at first for style. The copper-gold fabric caught the light and softened it. Her posture was straight, calm, almost royal. Her face was serene, not proud, not timid, just anchored. Kellen stopped breathing for half a second. Beside him, Soraya's expression changed so slightly that only fear could have recognized it. Because people were not merely noticing Nia, they were approaching her. A development bank chairperson greeted her by name. A trade minister thanked her for her rural cold storage policy paper. A venture founder from Kenya asked to discuss expansion. 2 institutional lenders shook her hand with visible respect. Amara Okonkwo embraced her warmly, in full view of everyone who mattered. Kellen stared. This was not the provincial wife he had discarded. Or perhaps it was exactly her. Only now, the world had finally found language for the value he had been too shallow to recognize. The evening program began. Awards came first. Investment announcements followed. Then the host stepped onto the stage and smiled toward the front tables. "Tonight," he said, "we also recognize a founder who transformed neglected rural logistics into one of the most promising women-led infrastructure platforms on the continent." A giant screen lit up. Images filled the room. Farm women loading produce into solar coolers. Digital route maps pulsing across inland corridors. Temperature-controlled vans crossing provincial roads. Small clinics receiving medicine on time. School feeding programs supplied efficiently. Riverside depots rebuilt into smart aggregation hubs. Young women in headsets managing dispatch floors. Containers stamped with the Rivermantle mark. Then the host said the name. Nia Maseko. The applause that followed was not polite. It was real. Investors stood. Founders stood. Ministers stood. Even some of the people who once laughed at women like her now stood too. Because greatness, once publicly named, becomes expensive to ignore. Nia walked to the stage. Kellen stayed seated 2 seconds too long, stunned by a truth larger than his pride. Then he stood as well, because even humiliation has instincts. At the podium, Nia looked out over the room with steady eyes. "There was a time," she began, "when I thought being overlooked meant being small." Silence settled over the hall. "But I learned something different. Sometimes people do not fail to see your value because it does not exist. Sometimes they fail to see it because they have trained their eyes to worship the wrong things." The room listened. We live in an age that confuses spectacle with strength, polish with purpose, and visibility with worth. But the women who built this work with me taught me another truth. What sustains life is not always loud. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it smells like soil. Sometimes it travels on broken roads. Sometimes it begins in places elegant people never bother to learn the names of. The applause began softly, then rose. Kellen felt every sentence like a private judgment, though she had not mentioned him once. Then the host returned to the stage. "And now," he said, "we are proud to announce a strategic acquisition and restructuring partnership that will reshape regional distribution infrastructure for the next decade." Kellen straightened. This was it. The rescue. The deal he had come for. A new slide appeared behind the host. Not Meridian Gates branding. A new entity. Rivermantle Infrastructure Holdings. The host continued. "In partnership with Amara Okonkwo Capital and a coalition of regional institutional backers, Rivermantle Infrastructure Holdings has acquired the controlling debt position and majority restructuring rights of Meridian Gate Logistics." For 1 second, the room forgot how to breathe. His company. His empire. His name. Bought not by a foreign giant, not by a long-time male rival, by the woman he had mocked as too rural for rooms like this. The room exploded into stunned conversation. The host kept speaking, but Kellen barely heard him. Under the new structure, Meridian Gates' warehousing network will be redirected toward essential cold chain corridors, farmer access distribution, pharmaceutical stability routes, and women-led regional supply ownership. Nia stood motionless, calm. Kellen did not. He looked at Soraya. For the first time that night, she looked like someone who realized glamour had no defense against reversal. This was not just failure. It was exposure. Public. Elegant. Irreversible. He had spent years building a company meant to impress powerful people. Nia had built systems that made power come looking for her. After the formal program, the room split into 2 kinds of people. Those trying to reach Nia, and those quietly stepping away from Kellen. His phone started vibrating. His CFO. A board member. A lender. A journalist. 2 investors he had ignored for months. Soraya touched his arm and said, "Stay calm." But her tone had changed. It no longer sounded intimate. It sounded tactical. Kellen found Nia later on a private balcony overlooking the city. Below them, traffic moved like nerves through darkness. For a few seconds, he could not speak. She turned toward him slowly, not surprised. "Congratulations," he said at last. The words sounded heavy in his mouth. "Thank you," she replied. He looked at her as though still trying to understand the scale of what had happened. "I never knew," he said. Nia's expression remained gentle, but not soft in the old way. "No," she answered. "You knew enough. You just kept measuring me with tools built for decoration." The sentence landed cleanly. Kellen looked down. "I made terrible decisions." Nia turned her eyes toward the city again. "Yes," she said. "And decisions reveal us. That's why they hurt." He swallowed. "You bought my company." She shook her head. "No, Kellen. I bought the future trapped inside a company you nearly buried under vanity." He had no defense for that, because it was true. After a moment, she continued, "I did not come here for revenge. Revenge keeps you tied to the people who harmed you. I came because your company touches workers, drivers, clinics, growers, suppliers, warehouse crews, and families who did not deserve to sink because you wanted applause. You chased prestige. I saw infrastructure." The silence between them was not hostile. That made it worse. Kellen lowered his head. "I was ashamed of the wrong things." Nia looked at him for a long moment. "I know." There was no cruelty in her voice, no triumph, only distance carved by healing. He stepped forward slightly. "If I could go back—" "You would not," she said softly. He stopped, because somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. A different version of him, many years ago, might have chosen differently. But the man who laughed at that table, the man who fed himself with status, the man who traded loyalty for spectacle, that man would have done it all again. And she knew it. The next morning, the headlines were merciless. Meridian Gate founder loses control in shock infrastructure deal. Women-led rural platform acquires major logistics giant. Nia Maseko leads new era in essential distribution. People who once praised Kellen began speaking about risk mismanagement. People who once begged for invitations to his table began claiming they had seen warning signs all along. That is the problem with success built on image. When the lighting changes, so does the loyalty. Soraya did not stay long enough to watch the collapse in full. Within days, she aligned herself with a separate advisory group and released a polished statement about shifting strategic priorities. She did not defend Kellen publicly. She did not stand beside him. She did not even pretend. Why would she? She had never loved the man. Only the glow around him. And now that glow belonged to someone else. In the months that followed, Nia did what truly powerful people always do after a public victory. She went back to work. Meridian Gate's theatrical vanity projects were reviewed. Wasteful expansions were cut. Decorative prestige contracts were sold. Warehousing corridors were redesigned around usefulness. Cold storage was expanded into rural districts. Women-owned transport operators received preferred capacity access. Clinics got more reliable delivery windows. Crop loss fell. Medicines arrived on time. Insurance costs dropped. Farmers negotiated from stronger positions. Regional food stability improved. The company Kellen built to be admired became useful for the first time. And usefulness, unlike glamour, survives scrutiny. Rivermantle expanded beyond agriculture.
It moved into vaccine routing, disaster response supply chains, and public-private resilience infrastructure. Young women trained as dispatch managers. Rural boys who once migrated to the city for unstable labor found work maintaining refrigerated corridors back home. Small growers formed cooperatives with bargaining power. Markets that had long extracted from the countryside finally began returning value to it.
One afternoon, nearly a year after the forum, Nia walked through the new Rivermantle Operations campus and heard laughter coming from a dispatch floor where women from 5 provinces were reviewing route performance maps. Sunlight filled the glass corridor. Purpose filled the air. A young analyst, no older than 25, approached her with a notebook in hand. "May I ask you something?" she said. Nia smiled. "Of course." The young woman hesitated. "After everything your ex-husband did, does winning like this make the pain worth it?" Nia looked around slowly, at the digital wall of routes, at the women no longer begging for access because they now controlled systems, at the trucks moving beyond old dependency, at the life standing where grief once stood. Then she answered, "The success did not heal me." The young analyst blinked. "It didn't?" Nia shook her head. "No, success is loud. Healing is quieter than that." "What healed you?" Nia's expression softened. "The day I stopped asking people blinded by shine to recognize substance." The young woman grew still. Nia looked through the glass toward the horizon beyond the city. Far away, Kellen Maseko still lived comfortably. Wealth had not abandoned him entirely. But command had. Narrative had. Influence had. He remained a man with assets, but not a man who could control meaning anymore. And that was the punishment pride reserves for itself. Not always ruin, sometimes remembrance. He would spend years remembering the woman he called too rural, too simple, too small for serious rooms. He would remember the night she entered in copper and gold and took the future out of his hands without raising her voice. He would remember that she did not destroy him. She outgrew the version of herself that ever needed his permission. And in the end, that was harder to survive than revenge. Because some men recover from losing money. Some even recover from public humiliation. But very few recover from the moment they finally understand the full worth of what they willingly threw away. Nia did not look back for long. Why would she? She had roads to rebuild, farmers to protect, women to finance, markets to redesign, systems to anchor. A continent full of overlooked intelligence waiting to be connected to power. She had become the kind of woman who no longer entered rooms hoping to be chosen. She entered rooms carrying terms. And if there was a final truth hidden beneath all the chandeliers, all the headlines, all the polished speeches and expensive fabric, it was this. The most dangerous woman in any room is not the loudest one. It is the woman who has suffered enough to know her value, healed enough to stop announcing it, and built enough that the world has no choice but to feel it. And that was the lesson Kellen learned too late. He belittled his quiet wife at the founders' ball. She returned as the woman who owned the deal. And she did not just take the room. She took the future.